Dr. Pachauri, you accepted the Nobel Prize on behalf of the Intergovernmental Council on Climate 2 years ago. Since then, there have been some developments. Now we have the Copenhagen Summit coming up, which is a very important summit in these matters. What are your hopes for this summit?
Well, I'm cautiously hopeful that it will result in an agreement, and a good agreement. Of course, the negotiations are moving very slowly and somewhat painfully. We can also see that in the United States, legislation at the moment is stuck. The Senate has yet to do anything really active by which they can come up with something that would be the equivalent of the Waxman-Markey bill, which has gone through the lower house, the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. And I think the U.S. leadership is extremely important because that would show the rest of the world that the country that's responsible for the largest share of emissions is willing to take the lead, as President Obama himself has said.
Yes.
So I think there will be an agreement, and I hope it's a strong agreement, but the shape of it is very difficult to foretell.
But Obama is, in a way, he's in a problematic situation. The lobby groups are very strong in America, but also he has to deliver for all the young people who voted for him, who are firm believers in environmentalism and maybe they think that environmentalism matters more than, for example, the economy.
No, I believe that he is really committed, and I think he's very true to his word. But there is a separation of powers in the U.S. Constitution which doesn't allow him to come up with new legislation unless Congress is willing to support.
But isn't this all a bit of window dressing while China and India are not sort of controlling their emissions?
But there you have to look at the reality of the situation. The problem, firstly, has not been caused by China and India. It is the cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases since industrialization in the industrialized world. Yeah. And this is what has enabled the industrialized world to have reached its present level of prosperity. Now, if you take the case of India, our emissions are just about 1.3 tons per capita, as compared to over 20 tons for the United States. There are 400 million people who have no access to electricity. So, how can you equate the two? I mean, historically, or even in terms of per capita emissions, there's a world of difference. So unless the developed countries that are really responsible for this problem are willing to lead and have the economic and technological power to come up with solutions.
But China is such a huge polluter, for example. If you really want to solve the problem or put bounds on the problem, you have to look at China as well.
I agree, but I think the first step has to be taken by the developed countries. And to be quite honest, when it comes to taking action under the Kyoto Protocol, 2 countries didn't even ratify the Kyoto Protocol, the US and Australia.
Yes.
And others which had made certain commitments under the protocol are falling far behind. So, I think it's important to correct that situation, to repair this situation, and then you'll find the developing countries will do what they can, and they will certainly will.
Would you say that this is the gravest crisis facing the world?
Undoubtedly, because people must understand that the impacts of climate change, if we do nothing, are going to be very, very serious across the world.
But in a way, what we are doing is only the minimum. We are only sort of fighting to reach the lowest common denominator.
Absolutely. But my belief is that in the last 2 years, there has been such a growth in awareness among the public and among the leadership of the world that I feel quite optimistic that this will result in action. But of course, there's a lot of inertia in the system. There are also vested interests who wouldn't want any action in this area. And they have a lot of power. They're able to block a lot of things. If you look at the United States, let's face it, a number of coal mining states, a lot of states where the oil industry is powerful, have congressmen and senators who really are afraid to take any action.
But what are the dangers facing us because of climate change?
Well, the dangers are pretty serious, because if we don't do anything about climate change, firstly, we'll have many more extreme events, more intense and more frequent floods, droughts, heat waves, extreme precipitation events. That means large quantities of rainfall in a short period of time. We also will see problems of water availability in several parts of the world. There's an impact on agriculture that's going to affect food security globally. And it will certainly affect some of the poorest nations in the world, where you already have problems of malnutrition and hunger and disease.
So the Indian subcontinent will be very hardly hit.
The Indian subcontinent, sub-Saharan Africa, other parts of Africa, some parts even of Latin America will be very badly hit. And, you know, we can really create a very unstable situation in the whole world, which will not allow any country to escape.
But haven't we really passed the deadline to avert this catastrophe?
We are very close to the deadline. I mean, the IPCC has estimated that if we want to limit temperature increase to about 2 degrees Celsius, then we have to make sure that global emissions peak no later than 2015. So that means we've got 6 years in which we have to make sure that beyond these 6 years, the emissions globally of greenhouse gases start coming down.
Yes.
So we have a very, very short window of opportunity.
But you also have quite a strong school of climate skeptics, those who say that we should be entering a cooling phase because of this less solar activity, and they point out that the ice is in fact recovering in the north. What do you say about that?
You see, the point is that the number of skeptics has gone down, but that doesn't mean that their voices have become any weaker. If anything, their voices have become much stronger. But for them to predict solar activity, I would say that they are playing God. Because who can predict solar activity? This is not something that follows a certain cycle. I mean, the Ice Age and the interglacial period are something that cannot be predicted. And if they are banking on the fact that somehow the sun will come to their rescue and make sure that the earth cools rather than warms up, then I think they're fooling themselves. The reality is that, yes, there will be natural changes in the climate, as has been the case historically, as has been the case for thousands of years. But today, we are affecting the climate through human actions. If you look at the last 50 or 60 years, temperatures have gone up sharply. And it's not just a case of smooth and steady increase in temperature. You have all these other disruptions which are taking place in the climate. You have the problem of sea level rise, which threatens the very existence of the small island states and several coastal areas like Bangladesh. So how can they ignore that? I mean, whatever happens as natural factors will happen. But how can we start predicting that nature will answer their beck and call and do what they expect will bring about cooling? You can't predict that.
What about the cost of bringing down emissions? Will this be a huge cost to mankind?
Not really. In fact, we have very clearly predicted, we have estimated that if we want to limit temperature increase to about 2 degrees Celsius or thereabouts, the cost to the global economy in 2030 will be less than 3% of the global GDP, which is really nothing. And if you look at the other benefits of that, you'll have lower air pollution, because emissions go down, you'll also have lower air pollution. You will have much higher energy security, because God knows what prices of oil will be in 2030. So we have to move to alternatives, we have to move to renewable energy, as indeed Iceland has been able to do. And I think Iceland is a leader in that regard.
Well, we are lucky. We have it sort of flowing out of the earth everywhere. So, but at the same time, we can be a bit hypocritical, because we are going to look for oil in the northeast ocean.
Well, I mean, oil is not going to go away, but we certainly have to start reducing our dependence on oil.
Yes.
And the co-benefits from mitigation in terms of stable agricultural production, higher energy security, lower air pollution, and therefore health benefits, really make this a very attractive option. It's better for the world to move in that direction than to continue on business as usual.
Yes. Some people like Björn Lomborg have said that it would be more advantageous to develop new technologies than to cut down on emissions. That's the way out of the
Well,
situation.
Björn Lomborg, as it happens, is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
I like the fellow.
Yeah.
And he has been shifting his position. You see, earlier he even doubted climate change.
Yes.
Today, at least, thank God, he accepts that there is climate change and that humans are having an influence on it.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not either or. You have to do all of this. You have to develop new technology. You have to change your lifestyles. You have to cut down on emissions in every possible way. You really can't rely on one single approach. It's not an either or situation at all. So I'm sure 3 years from now, Björn Lomborg will be agreeing with what we are saying.
You're a vegetarian yourself, and I have heard you quoted saying that one of the dangers is more people eating meat in the world.
I've become a vegetarian for very good reason, because today you see the entire meat industry is like a factory. Firstly, you cut down forests to create pasture land. Then you feed large numbers of cattle with grains, food grains, and that's highly energy intensive. And then these animals are killed. It's another matter that they are treated with extreme cruelty. Then they are refrigerated and transported all over the world. And then you hold them in wholesale depots under refrigeration. It goes to retail outlets under refrigeration. Every refrigerator in the home today has a huge freezer.
Yes.
Because you're storing a large quantity. So, the entire cycle, right from the moment you cut down trees to you consume that food on the table, is very intensive in energy use and therefore emissions. I only tell people, don't become vegetarians, but eat less meat. And I said, if you eat less meat, you will be healthier, and so would the planet.
But when people become richer, for example, in India and China, they start eating more meat. And
it's unfortunate.
Yes.
Because, you can get all your nutritional requirements from plant food. There is no need for us to eat meat. But it's a fashion. When you have more income, you start eating more meat. You eat more poultry, you eat more meat. And I think this is a trend which has to change.
To end this discussion, this conversation, Iceland, well, like we said, we are lucky we have energy flowing everywhere. We are using it to build aluminium plants like this. There's no tomorrow. But Iceland could be really a carbon-free society. We have the possibility with all this energy. What is your view of the future of Iceland?
I think Iceland can really be in the lead to become a low-carbon society. Because, yes, you have all this endowment of renewable energy. Please exploit it in every possible way. Please see that your transport sector becomes totally dependent on electricity, which comes from hydro or geothermal. Please make sure that your homes are terribly energy efficient. And I think Iceland can also provide both policy advice and technological inputs to the rest of the world. And you would be able to generate employment far greater than you would if you were using only conventional energy.
Yes.
And this is a message that the rest of the world must also accept. Just to give you a number, if you have a coal-based thermal power plant, it gives you about 7 persons employment for 1 megawatt. In a solar thermal plant, which of course you can't set up in Iceland, but in other parts of the world you can, for 1 megawatt you generate 23 jobs. So there's a world of difference, and I think this is the way the world has to go. You can create employment, you can cut down on emissions, and you bring about a major shift in economic activity which will benefit everyone.
So this would be a technological revolution as well.
Absolutely.
With all the benefits
Absolutely.
of a technological revolution.
Nothing less than the Industrial Revolution itself. I mean, we are on the verge of what I call an energy revolution. So I hope Iceland will be in the lead in this.
So you will be in Copenhagen, I think, in December.
Yes.
And I wish you all the best for that summit. I don't know. I know not everybody is too optimistic about it. But
I'm not too optimistic. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think things will work out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.